Hello and welcome back to Drippy Dresla's podcast. Today I'm going to be talking about two subjects. One is why you have to choose between being dependent on others and making plans with people, and the other is the movies that we've used as an excuse to ruin society. And to start off with, the reason that you have to choose between being dependent on other people and making plans with others is because, let's say you make plans with someone, but you're being dependent on a different person in order for those plans to work. All it takes is for that different person to not be able to show up, and then your plans with the person you're trying to make plans with are going to fall through. And you shouldn't want to be dependent on other people anyways. You should want to do things yourself. And if you don't really have much of a choice, that's one thing. But if you're depending on another person, you shouldn't be making plans with others, because then those plans are going to fall through. And I learned that the hard way, because I really thought that my editor was going to be able to edit my song, on all of my songs on time, and that everything was going to go according to plan. Well, that wasn't fair to my editor, because number one, I shouldn't be dumping responsibilities like that on her in the first place, because she's my friend, and I don't want to have to be overly reliant on my friends. I want them to be able to have their own plans in life. I want to give them space. I want to, make sure that, I'm taking care of me. And I should be able to do my songs myself anyways, because if I'm going to do something this significant as a YouTube podcast, and if I'm going to release songs, that's something I should be doing myself. So even if you think that everything's going to work out, if you're going to be dependent on another person, don't make plans. And if you want to make plans, don't be dependent on that other person. Otherwise, you're going to be like me. You're going to disappoint all of your viewers. So anyways, let's talk about the movies that have ruined society. And yes, for the rest of my audio, I'm going to say that have ruined society, because when people talk, they have a tendency to over-exaggerate. And sometimes, it can be a good thing. Sometimes it can be a bad. If you've already established with the people you're talking to that this is what you mean when you say that, then it's okay to over-exaggerate. But if the people you're talking to don't always know that you're over-exaggerating, or they do, but they don't know for sure what you mean when, you're over-exaggerating, that's bad. That's going to lead to some miscommunication. And another thing is, sometimes, you might be over-exaggerating. You might think the other person's okay with it, when in reality they're not. For me, I know you guys would be okay if I said the movies that have ruined our society, because it would save a lot of time, and because you guys are going to get sick of hearing me say, oh, what have we used as excuses to ruin society, because you already know that's what I mean when I say that have ruined our society. So make sure that next time you're talking to someone and you want to over-exaggerate, they know what you mean when you're over-exaggerating. So anyways, let's get started. First up on the list, I'm going to have to say Footloose, only because that's the one that came out first. No, I don't think Footloose has done as much damage compared to some of the other movies on the list, but it's definitely done some damage. Because Footloose, it's a story that has teen sex and drinking, but then it tries to promote positive messages about religion and, standing up for yourself and others and fighting for what you believe in. And that's not a very good idea, because parents are going to raise their kids to put up with other people's crap, to not stand up for themselves, to not fight for what they believe in. because they don't want their kids to represent something inappropriate. And people in general are going to be afraid to stand up for themselves and fight for what they believe in because they're worried what other people are going to think. Up next is Vegas Vacation. I don't think that movie itself did a lot of damage, but it did create the trend in Hollywood that if the guy cheats, it's a bad thing. But if the girl cheats, that's okay because it just goes to show that she was unhappy in the relationship. Even if, she could have easily just left and not have to put up with him ever again. Up next is definitely Shrek, and I think it might have gotten its ideas from Vegas Vacation. I'm not 100% sure, but there's a chance. And the reason that the first Shrek has ruined society is obviously because it created that joke of, if a guy rushes a girl into a physical relationship, that's a bad thing. But if a girl does the same thing to a guy, that's okay as long as she's happy. Like, no, that's not a good mindset because, parents shouldn't want their daughters to think like that. And it's also not a good mindset because, how would you feel if you were a guy, if you respected women, if you liberated women, if you treated them like people, and then people thought that because you were like that, you deserve to get treated like absolute shit. Now, I agree, it is one thing, if a guy does disrespect women, because then, it's okay to be like, well, how would you feel if a woman did the same thing to you? But for real, we need to stop, and here's another example of over-exaggerating. A lot of people, probably do just, think, use that as their type of humor, or, they're over-exaggerating when they say that. What they mean is that it's worse for women because physically it's worse for women, but then you say that to the wrong people and all it does is create problems. Another way that Shrek has ruined society is because of the they judge me before they even get to know me moment. And because of this, a lot of people think that negative reinforcement doesn't work. I agree 100% that there are times where negative reinforcement is used in cases where it doesn't need to be used. And there's also times where people are a little bit too severe with their punishments. And I think what people need to realize is that humans, they're born being compassionate and sensitive. They're born being empathetic and looking at things through other people's perspectives. And they're born wanting to experience negative consequences to their actions. It's the way parents raise them that causes them to move away from that mindset. And I know for a fact that negative reinforcement did work back in the day because I know an older person that has argued it but didn't give me any specific examples of when it was used on him. But my 5th grade science/social studies teacher told me this story of when her and her older brother used to prank this old man by stepping on his property. And he didn't like it when they stepped on his property. And one day, shortly after she'd gone to the dentist, I forget what it's called, but she had something put in her teeth, not braces, but something. And, she bought herself a candy bar. It was a really sticky candy bar, but that old man saw her and he decided to trip her and she fell on her face and the candy bar got stuck, where that thing was. She yanked it out and her mom didn't buy her a new one. Her mom was like, hey, well, I already paid for this one. You need to use your allowance money to go to the dentist and get a new one. And she said that was good for her, that it taught her a life lesson, that it taught her that, you know, if she's going to trespass on someone else's property, that's the kind of consequence she should get for her action. And I know a middle-aged person who claims that when he was in 8th grade, a teacher dragged him out into the hallway in front of his entire class and a couple other classes. He was embarrassed about it, but he said it was good for him because it taught him that, you know, if you're going to say something, you know, if you're going to talk back, if you're going to do anything, you got to have a good reason for it. You got to have something to back it up, because, you know, if you don't, you know, you deserve to get consequences for your actions. You know, people, they're going to treat you like shit, you know, if you're going to say stuff that, well, makes you seem like shit. And that is why, you know, if you don't like a certain type of humor, you shouldn't force yourself to find humor in it, because take this from someone whose friends, you know, point out how he finds out a lot of humor in things. Not everything can be funny, man, okay? It's okay if you don't find humor in a couple jokes, you know? And Shrek, I mean, the first Shrek, I mean, the humor they use isn't really appropriate. I mean, look at, you know, because they use certain types of humor, there's people who go about it as if those kinds of jokes are true, even though it's stupid humor. It's not meant to be true. It's just meant to be stupid. Up next on the list, which I'm sure isn't going to surprise you based on the cover I used for this audio, is Shrek the Third. I mean, I'm sure a lot of you don't even need me to explain it. You already know. But for those of you that do, number one, there's kids and even adults who are afraid to confront other people about their problems or to be the people that they want to be in fear of representing things from this movie. There's people who don't really have common sense nowadays, all because they got that from Shrek the Third. And it's definitely fed into the mindset that was already started by Hollywood, that as long as, you know, people have a family, it doesn't matter what kind of people they are, because family is the most important thing. Even though, you know, if you're not a good person, if you're a toxic person, if you're not going to make a very good parent, you shouldn't be having kids. And the reason that people got that from Hollywood is because back then, there weren't really any movies that came out and said, you know, just because someone's your parent doesn't mean you owe them anything. You know, if they're toxic towards you, you don't have to have a relationship with them. No, people, you know, they were afraid that someone who had no right to talk about that subject because they hadn't experienced stuff like that themselves were going to come out with the movie with those messages, and they didn't want people to think that they got those lessons from a movie. So they just decided to stick it out with their toxic parents. They decided to continue talking to them, and they decided to bring kids into this world and treat those kids like absolute shit and raise them to have this exact same mindset. I don't think there were any movies that came out before Son of the Mask. Correct me if I'm wrong, but I don't think there were any movies like that that came out before that said, you know, your parent's your parent, you know, they're always going to be your parent and you have to talk to them no matter what. That's the main reason I hate that movie, Son of the Mask. I think the first Mask is a classic. It's definitely worth watching, but Son of the Mask never should have happened. And I can't believe that people would use that freaking cartoon movie as an excuse to ruin their lives. And obviously, Guardians of the Galaxy Volume 2 is probably the first movie that came out with the mindset that if your parent loves you and cares about you, and if their words and actions prove it, it's a good thing to want a relationship with them. But if your parent doesn't love you or care about you, or if their words and actions don't prove it because they choose other things over you, then it's okay to not want a relationship with them. And thankfully, it was written and directed by someone who didn't have a good relationship with one of his parents. And yeah, there might be a few people who get into your business, and there might be a few people who are like, oh, well, you only don't talk to your parents because of that mindset in Guardians of the Galaxy Volume 2, even though it's not true because if Hollywood never came out, there would be people who don't talk to their parents, but those are just people that don't have common sense, so they're easy to deal with. Up next on the list is Despicable Me. I know that a lot of you are probably shocked right now because you had no idea that Despicable Me could have ruined people's lives. I don't know that it's ruined people's lives, but it's definitely made immature adults more immature. And the reason I know this is because one time I was verbally sexually harassed by a kid. He said that because I was a male, I was supposed to take an interest in pornography, and I didn't take that from him. And an adult was like, hey, like, oh, it's just a joke, laugh it off. Back then, people joked like that. It was like, oh, are you a queer, if you don't look at this girl? And I was like, no, nobody thought of it as a joke back then. People genuinely thought men were gay, if they didn't have that mindset. And that is why you don't joke like that, because when you tell certain jokes, people aren't going to find humor in them. They're going to think that you actually still think like that. And I pointed out that it was a form of sexual harassment. And the reason I couldn't say verbal sexual harassment is because I knew the adult was going to be immature and say, hey, well, it's not that bad. And my point was, it doesn't matter right now if it's bad or not that bad. It's about whether or not I should be putting up with that other person's shit. And I know I probably, looking back, I probably should have said, well, that is verbal sexual harassment. But I'm glad that I didn't. I'm glad I made that mistake, because the next thing that adult said was, see, this is your problem. You think that because that person said or did that, they belong in jail or prison, even though I actually don't think that. And I know for a fact that he had to have gotten that mindset from Despicable Me or some other movie that encourages that mindset, because how else could he have possibly thought that because I said sexual harassment, I was talking about jail or prison? If it weren't for Despicable Me or whatever other movie, doesn't your mind automatically think, oh, well, that's true, that's verbal sexual harassment? And just to clarify, I do not believe that person should have gone to prison. I actually would have been one of the ones fighting for him not to go to prison if he were to have been arrested, and if there would have been a trial to see if he should go to prison, because yes, what he said was bad, I didn't like that, but I wouldn't want him to go to prison for something like that. No, jail 1 or 2 nights, yes, that actually would have been good for him, because it would have gotten him to realize that you don't say certain things, you don't think of things in ways that don't line up with common sense, and you don't poke your nose in other people's business. Now, if it was longer than 2 nights, I also would have been one of the ones fighting that he shouldn't go to jail for that long. And this is exactly why people shouldn't force themselves to like certain things, because imagine being one of those people who talks to that adult or any adult who thinks like that, who says that you're going to go to jail or prison, or you think that someone's going to go to jail or prison even though that's not what you're trying to say, Don't you think that would be pretty irritating, and I'm sure a lot of you are probably looking back right now thinking, oh shoot, have I ever said something to someone who thinks like that? Have they interpreted it as something totally different than what I meant? And yeah, that is why, to be honest, I'm not a big fan of Despicable Me, but I do like it a lot. And it's not because I know that people will think like that because of this movie. Really, I didn't think it was that great because I didn't like how they used mannerisms as a way of giving us a story that's unique and different rather than just a story itself that's unique and different. And that is why I hope that this audio was deeply effective. I hope that a lot of you got something out of it, whether it was just, a relatable session or something that made you reflect on your likes and dislikes yourself and whether or not you've been using movies, as an excuse to ruin your life and quite possibly maybe even other people's. And I hope that I got all of the major ones on this list. If you feel that there's 1 or 2 or maybe even 10 other movies or shows that you believe have ruined society and you think I should have talked about them, feel free to leave a comment in the comment section below. I will do some research, of course, just to make sure that it's actually something that has ruined society, unless, of course, you provide it for me. But even then, I'm going to double check just to make sure. Thank you all so much for listening to this podcast. I hope that it was deeply effective. Feel free to hit that like and subscribe button if you haven't already. And I can't wait to read the comments in the comment section below. For some of you, I will see you on Sunday when you watch my next video, and for others, I will talk to you next week Friday when you listen to my next audio.